Today, carnage in Paris, at least 40 killed and dozens held hostage. A state of emergency has been declared following synchronised terror attacks. Hello and welcome to our ongoing coverage of the terrorist attacks in Paris that are still taking place across the French capital. I'm Rachel Pupazzoni. Here is what we know so far. At least 40 people are known to have been killed in multiple attacks. French media is reporting 7 coordinated attacks, and some are still taking place as we speak. These are live pictures of Paris that we're bringing to you right now. In the deadliest of those 7 attacks, at least 15 people were killed. Now, that was near the Bataclan Arts Centre. Up to 100 people are reportedly being held hostage there. Other attacks hit a Cambodian restaurant and a bar not far away. Earlier, 3 people are known to have been killed in at least 2 blasts at the Stade de France, where a match was underway between France and Germany. Some reports suggest it was a suicide blast. Military personnel are being deployed across Paris, and city authorities have asked people to stay indoors. The French President Francois Hollande has declared a state of emergency for the whole of France and has decided to close the country's borders.
Has been called, will be called. Some places will be closed, roads will be closed.
L'état d'urgence, lui, sera proclamé sur l'ensemble du territoire.
The state of emergency will be applied to the whole French territory. I've also decided to close the borders.
Et en même temps que ceux qui auraient pu commettre les crimes qui sont
to make sure that those who committed these crimes can be stopped if they are trying to leave the territory. It is a terrible, terrible event that is upon us. Who are these terrorists? Who are these criminals? We must, in these harsh moments, think about the victims who are very numerous, for their families, for the wounded. We have to be compassionate and we have to be united and keep a cold head. France needs to be strong and the state needs to be strong. We will be. We also must call for everyone to be responsible. What the terrorists want is for us to be scared.
Il y a effectivement de quoi avoir peur. Il y a l'effroi.
There is something to be scared about, but in the face of terror, we have to be united, and we will vanquish these terrorists. French citizens, we have not finished the operations. There are some very difficult ones that we're dealing with right now in Paris.
De garder ici toute votre confiance dans ce que nous pouvons faire avec les forces de sécurité.
Please have faith in our security forces and that they can defend us from terrorism. Long live the Republic and long live France.
We will go to a member of the public in Paris in just a moment, but I first would like to update you on a statement from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. It's issued via the Smart Traveller website, and it says there were violent attacks at several locations in Paris on the 13th of November. A large number of deaths and injuries have been reported. French authorities are responding to these events and reportedly dealing with a hostage situation at the Bataclan Concert Hall. French authorities have declared a state of emergency, and local police have advised the public in the Paris area to avoid going outdoors in the coming hours. Now, the advice from the government says Australians in Paris should minimise movement in public places, follow the media for the latest information on security and follow the instructions of local authorities. Further violent incidents could occur. The level of advice so far has not been changed by the Australian government, and they continue to advise Australians to exercise normal safety precautions in France. And of course, you can keep across any developments via the government's announcements at smarttraveller.gov.au and choose France. Well, Gerhard Will is a South African living in close proximity to where the attacks have occurred in Paris, and he joins me now on the phone. Gerhard, thank you so much for speaking to us. Take us through what you've experienced so far.
Well, we arrived home at about 10 o'clock this evening to be faced by a stampede of frightened people coming towards us from the direction of the Bataclan, which is about 300 meters away. We immediately got indoors, and it's now completely locked down, this neighborhood. There's a sea of flashing lights down at the end of our road, and it's very, very quiet and very, very frightening.
We've been seeing over the last hour or so live pictures coming out of Paris, and we just can see a number of emergency services and those blue flashing lights that you speak of. In those moments where you saw those people running, what were your sort of immediate thoughts as to what may have been happening?
Well, you know, in this neighborhood we are a little bit put on tension, I suppose, because, of course, there was the Charlie Hebdo incident, earlier this year, much earlier this year, and we all participated in the very strong march following that incident to show solidarity in Paris. And I guess that what first crossed all of our minds is another incident like it. The only thing that I hope is that, this incident does not change the outpouring of goodwill and solidarity that happened during the protest and the demonstration earlier in the year.
We heard from the French President Francois Hollande a little earlier mentioning that the country's borders have been closed. When you look down now on the street, do you see people moving about, or is it people like you have sort of rushed indoors and sort of barricaded themselves inside?
There's almost no one moving on the street. I think most people are barricaded inside. Sporadically, there have been people running away from the area. I think that's a result of bars elsewhere in the area being released by the police and people making their way as quickly as possible away. I noticed that there are members of the Red Cross also giving attention to people who may have been a bit closer to the action, a bit closer to the tragedy this evening. And they are being treated by the Red Cross in our road and others. But it's a very, very tense, extremely shocking situation.
How long have you been living in Paris for, Gerhard?
I've been living here just over 8 years now, and we lived in England before.
Have you been able to sort of make contact with your friends, your colleagues, anyone that you may be concerned about?
Yes, of course, social media has come in very useful for that. We've made sure that everyone that we know in the area is okay, and we've made it known that we're okay to people back home. Of course, being so far away from one's family, it's always important to make them know that you're okay. The world's a small place. One of my friends on social media, in fact, is in turn a friend with someone who was in fact shot in the leg at one of the establishments that was attacked this evening. So it all brings it very close, despite the fact we are dispersed around the world.
Absolutely, that is so close. And have you had a chance to speak to any of your neighbours to sort of gauge how other people are feeling in your community?
Yes, we're very close, as is often the case in France. We're very close with the people in our apartment block, and they're almost to a person too scared to emerge, really. I think we've been sending Facebook messages and text messages amongst ourselves just to ascertain if we're all okay. I think they're keeping strictly indoors and probably won't emerge until tomorrow morning now.
Do you know much about how people who may be far from home in another part of town, are they able to get home, or is it the case where, as we've heard in some instances, that people are taking refuge wherever they can?
Yes, I've noticed that there are people that have been unable to travel where they need to go. Certainly the entire area around the incidents has been cordoned off. That encompasses a whole lot of quite busy main roads here in France, in Paris. So I would imagine that would be a very common problem. The metro is also now shut down entirely. So there must be some very desperate people out there trying to get shelter for the night, I would imagine.
And have you had authorities literally knock on your door and tell you to stay inside, or is it a matter of keeping an eye on social media, the TV news, to sort of get these notifications from authorities?
We've had heavily armed French police patrolling up and down our road, who have made it very clear that they strongly discourage people from emerging from their front doors. We did briefly, and in very short order, it was suggested to us that we return, and we didn't need much encouragement to do that. So yes, the police have been encouraging people to keep inside.
Gerhard, well, thank you so much for speaking to us, and best wishes, and we hope that you and your family and your loved ones stay safe as this terrorist attack continues.
Thank you very much.
Well, let's get some more developments now in Paris. I'm joined by our Europe correspondent, Barbara Miller. Barbara, this situation has been going on for a couple of hours now. Perhaps you can take us through what we know so far.
Well, it began at about 9 o'clock local time in France. That's several hours ago now. And reports began to emerge initially of a couple of explosions at a sports stadium. And that was where an international soccer match was going on between France and Germany. And the President, François Hollande, was actually at that match. We're told he was moved out of that stadium as these reports of explosions came through. Initially, we also heard about what was described at the time as a drive-by shooting at a bar or restaurant in the 11th district of Paris. We're now looking at a situation where some reports are suggesting that there may be 6 or 7 locations within the French capital which are under attack, and the worst of which seems to be this concert venue where a heavy metal band was playing and where there has been a hostage situation. Now, reports in the last few minutes suggesting that police have stormed that location and brought that situation to an end. Some French media suggesting that there may be many casualties in that operation, or people perhaps killed in the run-up to that operation. The band who was playing there has issued a statement saying that it's not sure of the whereabouts of its band and crew, and its thoughts, of course, are with everyone involved in that. So this is still an ongoing situation. And clearly, as you've been saying, Paris now in lockdown as it faces this spate of terrible, deadly attacks.
People's minds, no doubt, have been cast back to the incidents surrounding the Charlie Hebdo attacks. This is clearly a much bigger event, multiple locations, different techniques we can assume have been used. What does that say in terms of how Paris will cope with this?
Well, that's right, and it was interesting that the President described these attacks as unprecedented because, of course, Paris did face those terrible attacks at the beginning of the year on the offices of the satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo, and then at a kosher supermarket. 3 attackers involved in those attacks, and that situation, as you know, went on for a few days until those attackers were killed. This looks as though multiple people are involved. Some of the reports from that concert venue, the Bataclan, were suggesting that a couple of attackers had been killed. But this is clearly something on a much, much bigger scale, and that's why we've seen the President saying that this is something that requires a state of emergency, and this announcement that the borders are being closed. Now, it's not entirely clear what exactly that means. Probably that it will be very difficult for people to leave certain borders in Paris. It's not the case, as we understand it, at least at the moment, that travel in and out of France has been stopped. But the military is moving in, and clearly we've got a number of live locations here, and of course the concern that there may be further attackers out there waiting to launch their own attacks.
You mentioned the closure of the borders there, Barbara. I guess pointing to the seriousness and the severity of this situation. And of course there's the Schengen Agreement in place across much of Europe. Have we ever seen, or can you think back to recent times where we've seen this kind of situation where borders for one country have been closed?
Well, I guess we've been seeing it again and again, and to a certain extent with the migrant crisis sweeping Europe, and that has put Schengen under threat, and parts of borders or borders between, for example, Hungary and Serbia, or now Slovenia is putting up a border with Croatia. So we are seeing this kind of action because of that issue that's going on. Now, this, of course, is very, very different. And a French cabinet meeting, we understand, is ongoing. I would imagine at that, the exact details of what that entails will be being discussed. It is possible under a state of emergency for police, for example, to go into any apartment and raid it, essentially. So a number of police powers, of course, will come into effect with that state of emergency, because clearly there's going to be massive concern here that several, at least, of these attackers are still on the loose.
We've heard from various world leaders, and we'll bring some of the US President Barack Obama shortly. I wanted, Barbara, if you could possibly take us through what the British Prime Minister has said, and of course the French President Francois Hollande.
Well, the French president appeared shaken when he addressed the nation in a televised address. As we've said, he said it was unprecedented. He said it was a horror of what was happening to his country. Now, he, as we were saying, was directly involved in this, in a sense, in that he was at that stadium where France and Germany were playing. So clearly shocking for him. We also heard from the German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and France was actually playing Germany in that soccer match. So the German national soccer team was in Paris at the site where we believe at least a couple of explosions went off. Some suggestions that one of those may have been a suicide attack. Angela Merkel saying she was profoundly shocked at that. And of course, similar statements coming from the British Prime Minister, also from the UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. And I think we can also hear now from Barack Obama, who said he hadn't had a chance at that point to speak to Francois Hollande, but was pretty quick after the scale of these attacks began to come clear to make his televised address.
Paris itself represents the timeless values of human progress. Those who think that they can terrorize the people of France or the values that they stand for are wrong. The American people draw strength from the French people's commitment to life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. We are reminded in this time of tragedy that the bonds of liberté and égalité and fraternité are not only values that the French people care so deeply about, but they are values that we share. And those values are going to endure far beyond any act of terrorism or the hateful vision of those who perpetrated the crimes this evening. We're going to do whatever it takes to work with the French people and with nations around the world to bring these terrorists to justice and to go after any terrorist networks that go after our people. We don't yet know all the details of what has happened. We have been in contact with French officials to communicate our deepest condolences to the families of those who've been killed, to offer our prayers and thoughts to those who've been wounded. We have offered our full support to them. The situation is still unfolding. I've chosen not to call President Hollande at this time because my expectation is that he's very busy at the moment. I actually, by coincidence, was talking to him earlier today in preparation for the G20 meeting. But I am confident that I'll be in direct communications with him in the next few days, and we'll be coordinating in any ways that they think are helpful in the investigation of what's happened. This is a heartbreaking situation, and obviously those of us here in the United States know what it's like. We've gone through these kinds of episodes ourselves. And whenever these kinds of attacks happened, we've always been able to count on the French people to stand with us. They have been an extraordinary counterterrorism partner, and we intend to be there with them in that same fashion. I'm sure that in the days ahead we'll learn more about exactly what happened, and my teams will make sure that we are in communication with the press to provide you accurate information. I don't want to speculate at this point in terms of who was responsible for this. It appears that there may still be live activity and dangers that are taking place as we speak. And so until we know from French officials that the situation is under control and we have more information about it, I don't want to speculate. Okay? Thank you very much.
That is the US President Barack Obama, who spoke very soon after we sort of first heard about these attacks. And still with me is our Europe correspondent, Barbara Miller. And I will also point out that we are expecting the Australian Foreign Minister, Julie Bishop, to address the media from Perth. That should be in about 10 or 15 minutes or so. And of course, we will bring that to you as she makes that announcement. Barbara Miller, I'll just go back to you. Have we heard any sort of reports or any speculation as to who or what or why or who's responsible, why this has happened?
No, I mean, a couple of unconfirmed reports suggesting, of course, that, as you might expect, that these attacks are perhaps linked to people who associate themselves with or are members of the Islamic State group, and also some reports that attackers shouted Allahu Akbar as they entered at least one of the venues. Disturbingly, in the last few minutes, a couple of French media organisations, including the AFP, suggesting that perhaps 100 people might have died in that hostage situation at the concert venue. And it's being reported that François Hollande is now on his way there. So certainly that hostage situation, which seems to be by far the worst of these attacks that have gone on across the French capital, seems to be over. But some worrying news about the possible extent of casualties there. Of course, it is very early, and reports, of course, are confused at this stage.
Has there been much discussion as to the timing of this attack? It's obviously just beginning to become the weekend there in Paris. A lot of people will have finished work for the day, out for dinner, or indeed at a concert, as we're hearing so much about. A lot of tourists in town. Has there been speculation as to the timing, I guess?
Well, I guess there's a number of possible things we could speculate on there. Yes, it was Friday night, so bars and restaurants were very busy. It wasn't a particularly cold night given the time of year. An awful lot of people out and about, saying that in a major European capital there would be a fair number of people out on any given night. It comes, as you'll know, on the day that the US and Britain suggested that they had killed the man known as Jihadi John, who is the man who appears in several beheading videos of Western tourists. So there will be speculation and research going into whether there's a link there. It also comes just ahead of Paris hosting a major climate conference. So the world leaders are, or at least until tonight, were expected to descend on Paris for that climate meeting, which is due to kick off at the end of this month. And clearly now there will be a lot more discussion going on about security for that event and whether in fact it's safe to hold it. And we've also got the G20 happening in Turkey this week now, and we're hearing that François Hollande has already said that he won't be going there, as he clearly has to deal with this situation. So the timing is interesting for a number of reasons. It's still far too early to say whether these attacks were launched because of any one of those reasons, or simply because the people who have planned them and executed them found themselves ready to do so.
Yes, and as you've said, Barbara, we are still very much in the middle of this situation, and I'm sure we will learn more as the hours and the days indeed go on. Barbara Miller, we'll leave it there for the moment. Our Europe correspondent, thank you. Well, let's go now to Canberra, and we'll speak to Dr. John Blaxland. Now, he's a terrorism expert with the Australian National University. Thank you so much for coming in and speaking to us. What's your interpretation so far of what we know?
Thank you, Rachel. Look, the situation is quite grave, but I think it's important to keep it in perspective and put this in the context of similar events elsewhere. This is a phenomenon that echoes what happened to a certain extent, like in New York in 2001, but perhaps more akin to what happened in London in 2005 on the 7th of July, where multiple incidents occurred, multiple bombings took place, dozens were killed, hundreds were injured. This also echoes what happened in Mumbai in 2008, where a terrorist group coordinated their actions with about 12 incidents around Mumbai. It also has echoes in Russia, in the kinds of terrorist activities we've seen there that are connected with the developments in Chechnya and extremist behaviour reacting to the government actions in Chechnya as well. So there's a number of instances close at home for Australia, of course. We have the incidents with Bali, the Bali bombing, which saw a couple hundred people killed in 2002, another bombing in Jakarta in 2003, a bombing again in Bali in 2005. So there is a pattern of international incidents where extremists take it into their own hands to pursue their political and other objectives. It's very interesting to reflect, though, on what's happened here, though, in that what we're seeing is, the French counter-terrorism expertise is par excellence, if you like. It's really superior. The French have been masters of counter-terrorism since before the Algerian War in the 1950s and 1960s. So to see this kind of activity happen particularly after Charlie Hebdo, where it's actually happened below the radar scope, where the terrorists have acted in a way that was not able to be detected by all of the spectrum of surveillance and monitoring systems available to the French state, that this went below that radar. This is, I think, one of the most disturbing aspects of this, because remember, you think about the experience from Mumbai, the experience from London, the experience from Bali. There's been iterative evolution and increased sophistication of monitoring and surveillance techniques and capabilities available to states, particularly ones linked to, in the West. And France is amongst the leading powers in terms of its sophistication in ability to monitor extremist groups and potential terrorist activities. So for this to happen is kind of a new benchmark, if you like, and it's a very disturbing development, one that it's not surprising that French President Hollande has called for a state of emergency. It's quite a reasonable response under the circumstances.
What do you think about the nature of this attack? We've obviously reports of explosions, hostages being taken, multiple locations. What does that say about what these people who are responsible are trying to achieve?
Well, look, I think we need to keep it in mind in terms of there's a couple of possibilities. One is that this is a very sophisticated group that's acting in concert, akin to what we saw in Mumbai in 2008. But then again, it's quite possible that we could see it much closer akin to what we saw in London in 2005. So we need to be careful about not jumping the gun in terms of reflecting on what level of expertise or coordination that may be involved here. This could be simply a gang of people, a group of people who decided to act together on the one night and not having breached that detection threshold, if you like, in terms of how they were perceived by the various intelligence and surveillance monitoring systems. And the fact that it wasn't detected does suggest this is either a pretty unsophisticated group of people who just decided to act in unison, or a remarkably sophisticated level of coordination by people who are attuned to the weaknesses of the surveillance system and of the security system of the French state at the moment, and were able to work between the cracks, if you like, to work out a way to attack at these various sites in a coordinated manner without triggering a reaction in anticipation that would have nipped it in the bud beforehand.
Obviously, multiple attacks in multiple locations. Do you think it's likely that there will be more in coming hours?
If we look at the trend from previous incidents, if you look at the incidents from London in 2005, Mumbai, even New York in 2001, Bali bombings, etc., there's there's a certain critical mass that you can surge to get to this point. Beyond that, it's actually very hard to sustain while not being detected. So my sense is that we probably, we don't know for sure, but going on past track record of these kind of incidents, it would point to this being kind of, we have reached the apex, if you like, of this wave, and that we're probably seeing that is now on the decline for now. And that the French state authorities now are in a position to try and pick up the pieces and catch the various players and the supporting people behind the actual players who carried out the incidents around Paris. But it's very complicated. It's we don't even have anybody really claiming responsibility for this at this stage. This is the kind of thing that we've seen associated with violent extremist groups such as Daesh, but we haven't seen that declared by anybody. And while there have been, reports of somebody calling out Allah Akbar, pardon me. That is not, at this stage, doesn't really tell us very much at all about what kind of group we're dealing with here.
I'm speaking with Dr. John Blaxland. He's a terrorism expert with the Australian National University. On that point of responsibility, are you surprised that no group has claimed responsibility yet, or would you assume that it is too early?
Well, it depends on what their objectives are, what the group's objectives are. It may well be quite convenient to simply not declare one's hand in this instance and to actually leave the situation as confused as it is. If the objective is to simply, ruffle the feathers, if you like, of the French state. Remember, France has been pretty actively involved in the Levant. It's got combat aircraft flying missions over Syria. It's got a long history of involvement in Lebanon. It's got a pretty significant historical connection with this part of the world, and there are so many potential players who could have a vested interest in getting at France over this instance. It could simply be, a further manifestation of the kind of resentment and marginalisation of many groups inside France in the banlieues, the rural, the estates that have been set up on the rim of places like Paris, where there's a lot of disenfranchised, unhappy, hopeless people who are resentful and looking to lash out. There's so many factors yet we still don't know about that we really can't speak with authority about what the implications are in terms of what this means in terms of how the French state can respond, and even if there are further international ramifications in terms of beyond France, be it in other parts of Europe, in Britain, or closer to Australia.
Okay. Dr. John Blaxland from the Australian National University, thank you so much for your insights.
My pleasure, Rachel.
Well, let's recap what we know so far. More than 110 people are known to have been killed in multiple attacks in the French capital, Paris. French media is reporting 7 coordinated attacks. Most of the victims were killed near the Bataclan Arts Centre. That incident, we understand, is now over. Other attacks hit a Cambodian restaurant and a bar not very far away. Earlier, 3 people are known to have been killed in at least 2 blasts in the Stade de France, where a match was underway between France and Germany. Some reports suggest that was a suicide blast. Military personnel are being deployed across Paris, and city authorities have asked people to stay indoors. These, of course, are live pictures that we are continuing to bring you here on ABC News 24. The latest information from French media suggests that a number of attackers have now been killed. Well, let's go on the ground now to Paris, where we're joined by Flo, who lives near the Petit Comminges restaurant, where one of those shootings took place. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Flo. What happened when you were there?
Well, I was in my room in the street where the shot happened at Rue Bichat, and I heard fireworks. I was about to go out to leave my place and to join some friends. And I just went to the window to see what was happening, and I saw the shots. So I was literally shocked, and I switched off the light, and I tried to figure out what was happening. And yeah, after some 1 minute or something like that, the police was arriving, and I can see the people in the street just lying down, and this is what happened when it happened. Yeah.
That is a terrifying account, Flo. Presumably you're still bunkered in your apartment now.
Oh yeah, I finally stay in my apartment because I think I can't even go in the street because my street is closed. Actually, I just heard that there is 18 deaf people just right down my building, and so yeah, it's quite horrible.
Have you had a chance or even wanted to look out the window in the last little while to see what is happening on the street below you?
Yeah, I can have a look now, and there's like the police, I don't know how to say, but they're like taking the bodies and find some IDs, etc. So this is what's happening right now. There is I can see almost 10 people, 10 bodies from my window.
Are you alone in your apartment, or have you got someone there with you?
No, I'm alone actually. I was about to leave, as I said, and fortunately I didn't leave 15 minutes before, So.
Yeah, incredibly fortunate, Flo, incredibly fortunate. Have you spoken to any of your neighbours in apartments next door, or do you know if anyone is in those apartments?
Oh, yeah. Actually, the fireman came to the building to check everybody if everybody was safe, etc. So, yeah, I think there's no problem in the building. I was quite scared, because the guy with a gun can enter the building and try to enter my apartment or apartment of my neighbor, So the first thing I did is to lock the door, and yeah, this is what's happened.
It's unimaginable to think what must have been going through your mind when you saw that from your apartment window.
Yeah, and still after, you get shocked and you try to reach your relatives to explain what you say, and also you try to reach your friend to know, because it's like places where my friends are going frequently. I go to take my coffee over there in the morning, and I just have a phone call from a friend who she was in a restaurant in another short place, and she told me that she just saw the guys and with the gun, and yes, she's safe, but well, I think my friend is safe, so this is fine for me, but it's quite terrible what's happening now.
It's shocking.
Yeah.
Have you had a chance to get in touch with all your friends, people that you may be concerned about?
Yeah. I'm at the moment I spend my time with my phone and giving news, asking for news, and try to figure out what's happening. Because I heard there is maybe more than 100 died people actually in Paris, killed people. And yeah, this is it's terrific. And also, there is a big Airbnb event in Paris gathering thousands of people from all over the world, and I think this guy were everywhere in Paris. So I was part of this event, and this is how I try to offer a safe place to this guy, to Twitter, for example, and I receive a lot of messages for everybody retweet my tweet, and nobody asked to come here, so I guess everybody's safe, but this is just shocking and terrific.
There must be a number of people who can't get home because of closures to the metro, or indeed the police or authorities are telling them to stay indoors. You've obviously put out that offer, but no one's taken it up. But do you know of other people who are taking shelter wherever they can?
Well, I guess a lot of people are do not succeed to get home now. But I don't have any idea of if I don't know if you want to know if this hashtag open door porte ouverte is working. I don't have any feedback about it.
And have you had, obviously you are across the road, have you had authorities or police or military knock on your door and tell you to stay inside or give you an update?
Well, they didn't tell me to stay inside because I was inside already. And just the fireman came to all the doors of my building, try to figure out if everybody was safe, and they knocked on my door and asked me if I was safe, and I say yes, and say okay, we just continue there.
Flo, thank you so much for speaking to us, and we hope that you do continue to stay safe and that your friends and your loved ones also.
Yeah, thank you very much for you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. I'll just remind viewers that we are expecting to hear from the Australian Foreign Minister, Julie Bishop. Now, she's in Perth at the moment, so we're expecting to bring you a live media conference when she addresses the media. You can see there that is the location where we're expecting to see her. She was due to stand there about 10 minutes ago, but of course this is an ongoing situation. Things are continuing to move, so no doubt she is trying to get the most up-to-date information before she addresses the media, and we'll of course take you there live when she steps up to that podium. Australian Human Rights Commissioner Tim Wilson was near the concert hall where reports of the rapidly climbing death toll are now coming in, and he joins us now via webcam. Thank you so much for speaking to us. What's your experience? What did you see? What did you hear when this all started to unfold?
Well, of course, we were at dinner near the events, but not immediately near the events. And what happened as the events continued to occur, where there was the initial issue in the theatre, and then it progressed, it became increasingly close to us, and we were oblivious to it up until the point where we were essentially told to leave the restaurant that we were in. We then walked back to our hotel in quite a speedy pace, and there are a number of bars that were deliberately closing as we walked back, and we were told to get back to our hotel as quickly as possible, and that's what myself and the people I've been with have done.
What was going through your mind when that was happening? You must have been frightened.
Well, the reality was we started getting SMSs from friends because we were completely oblivious about what was going on, asking if we were okay. And, of course, you started to prompt you to think, what the hell is going on, thinking it was a minor incident, then realising it was increasingly escalating. And then when we got back to the hotel, essentially the hotel locked the doors, turned off the lights on the ground.
Tim, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the Foreign Minister has just stood up and we're keen to hear what she has to say.
And its security forces. The Australian Government extends its deepest condolences to the families and loved ones of those killed in these horrific attacks that have occurred in Paris overnight. We understand that these 6 separate terrorist attacks commenced at around 9:30 p.m. Friday 13th of November in the heart of Paris. The death toll is at least 100 and rising. The numbers are still very fluid, and we are in contact with the French authorities. This is indeed a Black Friday for France and for the world. I have been in contact with our ambassador in France, Stephen Brady. There are no reports of any Australians killed or injured at this stage. However, there are 2,500 Australians registered in France at present. We believe the number of Australians in France would be much higher. We have offered all assistance to the French authorities, and we stand in solidarity with the French people in condemning these horrific and devastating attacks. I have, in the early hours of this morning, spoken to the Acting Prime Minister, Warren Truss, and the other ministerial members of the National Security Committee of Cabinet. I've also spoken with our head of ASIO. Our National Threat Assessment Centre within ASIO is currently monitoring the situation to assess whether there needs to be any changes to Australia's security assessment. At this stage, we do not intend to change the threat level. The implications for Australia at this point are in relation to consular and travel matters for any Australians in France at this time. I have spoken to Prime Minister Turnbull, who is in Berlin, and have shared with him all the information that I have received from the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and more particularly our ambassador in Paris. There was one Australian citizen who contacted our emergency consular line. He was in the vicinity of the attacks. We urgently made arrangements to locate him, and I can confirm that he is safe. Our advice is for Australians to take heed of the French government's advice. President Hollande has declared a state of emergency. The French borders have been closed. The Paris metro has been closed. Given that a train leaves the metro every 2 seconds in Paris, it means that there is just no ability to travel around Paris at present. The ambassador reports that the streets are empty, and as people are being urged to stay home, they are heeding that advice. For any Australians who have concerns for themselves or for their loved ones and friends in France, our consular emergency number, it's a 24-hour number, is 1300 555 135. That's 1300 555 135. If you are calling from overseas, another number is +61 2 6261 3305. That is +61 2 6261 3305. It is apparent that the French people and their way of life are under attack. No organisation has yet claimed responsibility. We don't know who has carried out these horrendous attacks on innocent people, but it certainly has all the hallmarks of the terrorist attacks that we've seen in recent times by ISIL, Daesh and similar organisations. The French people have been through an exceedingly traumatic time with the Charlie Hebdo attacks, and this again will test their courage and their fortitude. Australia and other like-minded countries around the world stand in solidarity with the people of France. Are there any questions?
What's your advice then to Australians who are in Paris at the moment? Is it to stay put or?
Australians in Paris should stay where they are, ensure that they're safe. Please contact the consular number so that we know where they are and we can maintain a register of Australians in Paris at this time. The embassy is staffed, fully operational and available to assist any Australians in trouble. No one will be able to travel until the state of emergency and the closing of the borders order has been lifted.
So you're advising people not to travel?
People should not leave their hotels, not travel. Wait this out until there's further advice from President Hollande and the French government. I understand that there will be an emergency meeting of the French National Security Committee this morning in French time. So in a few hours' time there has been an emergency meeting of the French cabinet and President Hollande has addressed the nation. But at this stage my advice to Australians is to stay put, keep safe. They won't be able to travel at present because of the national emergency measures, but to contact our hotline so that we can ensure that we have contact with all Australians in France and we can assure their families that they're safe.
What about those people that were planning to travel to Paris sometime soon?
Our Smart Traveller website has an updated travel advice. At this stage, our advice is to not travel. Let's ensure that we can understand the situation a little better, a little more clarity. There is a state of emergency. The borders are closed, so no one will be able to get into France at this time.
Is there any indication of how long Paris will be in lockdown for?
Not at this stage. The French National Security Committee will be meeting in a few hours, I understand, and so we'll have a better understanding of the current situation. I have been in constant contact with our ambassador, and the death toll is rising. The circumstances are very fluid. The siege at the Bataclan Concert Hall has just ended. I understand it was a rock concert. It was anticipated that many Europeans would be at this concert. The concert hall has a capacity of something like, I think something in the thousands of people who could have been there, perhaps up to 1,500 capacity. I understand when the two terrorists entered, many people were able to escape, but not all. And so the circumstances have been absolutely tragic and horrifying.
Through your conversations, I know we're at the death toll at about 100 at the moment. Has there been any indication of what it could actually rise to, or these?
At this stage, I understand the figure is about 112, but the official figures in relation to the concert hall for a start vary between 70 and 100. So it's too early for us to be confirming any particular numbers, but I can confirm that no Australians are reported as being among those killed or injured. That's not to say we won't get other news later as the situation becomes clearer.
Do you know if the G20 summit's continuing this plan?
I understand that President Hollande will not be attending the G20, but he intends to send Foreign Minister Laurent Fabius in his place. So I've not heard any information to the contrary. I believe that the G20 will proceed in Turkey.
And so the Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull's plans won't change at all?
At this stage, we are obviously seeking to clarify the situation. I will speak to the Prime Minister again shortly, and he will continue to be updated by our intelligence community, as well as Prime Minister and Cabinet and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. So we will speak again to the media if there is a reason to do so later today. But in the meantime, I repeat those numbers for those who are concerned about Australians overseas: 1300 555 135, and if you're calling from overseas, +61 2 6261 3305. Thank you.
And that is where, of course, we will leave the Foreign Minister, Julie Bishop. Now, she was speaking in Perth and updating what she and what the Australian government knows so far about these attacks that have occurred in Paris, and she described this as a Black Friday for France and indeed the world. She mentioned that there were 6 separate attacks that started about 9:30 p.m. in the heart of Paris. Julie Bishop mentioned that so far there have been no reports of Australians killed or injured at this stage. She says that about 2,500 Australians are currently registered in France. She expects that number, though, would be higher, and is asking that people who are in Paris at the moment to make themselves known to government officials. She's mentioned 2 numbers that can be called to notify consular officials. First of all, a 24-hour number best called from Australia. That's 1300 555 135. And for people indeed in Paris or overseas, the number is +61 26 261 3305. Now, Ms Bishop of course reminded us that the Australian Prime Minister is in Berlin at the moment. There is no decision made yet on what his movements may be in the coming hours and days. Ms Bishop mentioned that Australia stands with France in condemning these attacks. She reminded us, of course, that there will be a meeting of the French cabinet. Of course, it's very late at night there, so those officials will be meeting in the next few hours, and I expect that we'll get more of an update then once they've spoken to us. But of course, the main point from the Foreign Minister, at this stage there is no word of any Australians injured or killed in these attacks, and that Australians in Paris are asked to make sure that they contact consular officials to let Australian government officials know that they are there, that they are safe, and the official notification is to stay inside, stay in your hotel or wherever you may be staying, and follow the advice of French government officials. Now, before we went to that media conference with the Foreign Minister, I was speaking to the Australian Human Rights Commissioner, Tim Wilson. Now, he was near the concert hall where we're hearing reports of a climbing death toll there after people stormed that venue. He joins us again by webcam. Thanks so much for sticking around. You were describing to us what was happening when you were told to leave the area and get inside.
Well, essentially, we were at dinner. We had to leave the restaurant. As we were walking back at a very brisk pace, a number of bars and restaurants were being forcibly closed at the advice of police, and people were racing back to their hotels. Once we arrived back at our hotel, they very shortly locked all the doors, turned off the lights, and we were told to go back to our rooms for safety.
What are you being told now that you're in the safety of accommodation? Have you been given any more suggestions or told what to do, whether to stay where you are or what to do next, I guess?
Sure. Well, only through the media, where, of course, there's been a state of emergency called. And as a consequence, we've basically been told, stay in our room, don't go anywhere until further advice. In practice, the streets are now almost completely empty. Everybody has gone to a secure location, and everybody's trying to make sure there is no lights aren't on, or that people can draw attention to their homes. So we're just waiting for advice. But of course, it's a deeply unnerving event, because it's not as though there's been a singular attack now. There's been a number of them, and it progressively moved throughout the city, so you can never have any confidence about whether it is coming closer to you and where you are.
When you were out in the streets before you made it to the refuge of your accommodation, I imagine you were seeing emergency service personnel, police, indeed the military, all around you. Can you describe that scene?
Well, the theatre attack was a bit distant from us, so we didn't see much in terms of military personnel, but progressively there were more and more emergency services, particularly police vehicles, moving around Paris's streets. At first, we didn't know what was happening, but we thought something was going on. As people started to SMS us asking if we were okay, it was clear something substantial was going on. And it got to the point where it was quite clear that unless you were in a secure location inside a building, that it was not a safe place to be, particularly as the events and the terrorist attacks kept moving closer and throughout the city and towards different points. So it became clear that there was no sense of safety staying out on the streets, and that everybody should get back to a secure location as quickly as possible.
We heard from the Foreign Minister, Julie Bishop, just now, mentioning that registered in Paris are 2,500 Australians, but she expects that number to be higher and to make contact with consular officials. Is that something you think that people can easily do in this situation right now?
Well, if they're paying attention to Australian media, of course, the answer is yes. But I myself am not registered with the consulate for being here. So I am now, because I've heard the number, going to contact them and tell them. But, of course, most people are taking news streams from things like the BBC over their television, and so they aren't getting the Australian script. And so this is going to be, of course, part of the challenge now, making sure that everybody is fully aware, the government is fully aware of who is in Paris, and making sure that everybody is safe. I know that one of my colleagues is also in Paris, and so we've been, keeping touch through SMS. Interestingly, from these events, Facebook has an app essentially which popped up on my phone to ask if I was okay, knowing that I was in Paris, and asking me to confirm that I was safe, so that could be broadcast to my friends. So social media is playing a role as well.
It's an incredible role there. I wanted to ask you just finally as well, you mentioned sort of getting in touch with your colleague. Is it easy to be using phones, texting people, or is there a bit of a technical issue because so many people are trying to get in touch with each other?
Well, I haven't had any issues to date, but I imagine the entire telephone system is completely consumed. But in practice, things have worked relatively smoothly on that front. But you can feel the chill in the environment, because it's clear that nobody is clear on what has happened, and there is a lot of confusion, and so most people, as a consequence, have gone to safety and wherever they can find it. And you've heard stories, I think, already of people